inflammation seems like sort of like a ghost in the machine. It's like, ooh, inflammation, but it truly is, if you look at the root word, coming from the Greek and the Latin, it means to set on fire, right? And so there are these,
flame.
right? And these are some of the outward symptoms we might think about. It's just like pain, swelling, bruising, burning, aching, those type of things. But there's the majority of the inflammation that folks are experiencing oftentimes go unnoticed. There are these little kind of chronic low-grade fevers or little fires burning that are contributing to a lot of different metabolic disorders. And the reason that our bodies are doing it is really the inflammation is sending out a distress signal from different tissues to recruit and call in the immune system to support in defending against infections and repair. And the list goes on and on. Inflammation is actually not a bad thing. It's a
healer,
natural,
right?
Right. If we would get a wound, we would never heal without inflammation. If we got an infection, it would be deadly without inflammation. It's an important part of our evolution and our health.
What's the difference between that and chronic inflammation?
Right. So what we generally think about is acute inflammation. When we think about like a short-term intrusion, maybe an injury or an infection, for example, which the inflammation might last a few hours, even a few days.
Right.
But if inflammation is lasting for a long amount of time and also showing up in the wrong places, it can be devastating. And so now we're talking about chronic inflammation. And if we're venturing into chronic inflammation, we've got to look at what are the underlying components? What is creating the fire? What is throwing gasoline on the fire as well? And so if we take one of the conditions that you mentioned, so right now here in the United States, we've got about 242 million of our citizens are overweight or obese. 242 million.
Out of how many?
Right around 330,000.
330 million?
I'm sorry, 330
So
million,
240 million.
Yeah.
Are obese.
So we're looking at somewhere in the ballpark of 70 to even upwards of 80%
How is
of our
that
citizens.
possible now?
Exactly. That
How
should
have
be
we
the question.
gotten this far?
Yeah.
How is it just food is too accessible? Or the wrong kinds of foods are too accessible to so many people now? Social media, is it laziness? Is it why have we shifted from being a healthy nation, I don't know, probably 60, 70 years ago to an unhealthy nation?
Yeah. It's really a perfect storm of all the things. So the first thing to look at and to ask is what's going on, because our genes expect certain things from us. Our DNA expects certain things to have healthy outcomes or healthy cell replication, healthy expression. And so we've got to look at what are the things our genes expect of us. Our genes expect us to move.
Right.
For example, we're the most sedentary culture in the history of humanity and recorded human history. We're the most sedentary culture to ever exist right now.
All of humanity, or just USA?
Right, especially the U.S. We're the LeBron James. We're the king of sedentary behavior.
We're the Homer Simpsons.
We're the
yes.
Dope. Yeah, we're really leading the league in these things, and so that's number one. Also, our genes expect us to get adequate sleep, and this is something that we've talked about multiple times on the show. But it's built into our evolution. And if you think about sleep, it's very strange because you're incredibly vulnerable, you're unconscious. You'd think we might evolve out of it just for safety. But the thing is, so many wonderful, absolutely amazing things take place during sleep that we just haven't found a way to replicate, right? So even with the reduction of inflammation, which we'll talk about more, we have microglial cells in our brain, it's kind of the brain's immune system. And it's primarily active when we're sleeping, to reduce inflammation, to clean out metabolic waste, and things of the like. So,
what would you say are the 5 biggest benefits of the greatest night of sleep consistently? Like, what are the 5 main benefits that you get if you get deep REM sleep for 7-8 hours a night consistently, no interruptions, no light exposure, all the things you talked about in your other book, Sleep Smarter? What are the 5 main benefits that come from that versus interrupted sleep, 4 hours of sleep, staying up late with the phone, having coffee late at night, all that stuff? What's the benefits?
We'll just power pack bullet point with these. Number one, and this is because our culture, I always like to connect to something visceral. And people, we care about how we look.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
And so
you're younger.
Nobody's waking up like, I want to look so old today. I want to get my George Burns on. I want to be as old as possible, or I want to feel bad today about the way that I look, or they're not waking up like, I just want to look terrible and feel terrible today. And I've run in my clinical practice, I never met one person, and people might argue these things and get into a because of our cognitive biases. I've never met anybody who wants to be unhealthy.
Right.
Every single person wants to be healthy. Now, with that said, this is where sleep really comes into the fray, because over the years, me being a nutritionist, I thought that food was everything, because it was for me, it was my bridge, but there's many paths to the goal. When you're sleeping, it is the most powerful anabolic state that you can be in. So you're just teeming with what we call these, quote, anti-aging hormones, the release of human growth hormone, for example, that really it's also known as the youth hormone.
Yeah.
And also in that lane of body composition and overall health and fitness, researchers at the University of Chicago did a very simple study. They brought folks in and they wanted to see what would happen with their weight loss. They put them on a calorie restricted diet, and they wanted to see what would happen with weight loss when they were well rested versus when they're sleep deprived. And so they put them under both conditions. And I love studies that do that. They put people under both conditions to see what would happen. And so they allow folks to get 8.5 hours of sleep in one phase of the study. And they tracked all their metrics, their weight loss, et cetera. And then they sleep deprived them for the other phase. So they was getting 8.5 hours, now they're getting 5.5 hours. Tracked all their metrics.
Same group.
Same group on the same exact calorie restricted diet.
Same calories, yeah, everything.
But when they were sleep deprived versus when they were adequately rested, when they were getting enough sleep, they lost 55% more body fat just by sleeping more.
That's crazy.
It doesn't even make sense.
Were they working out
rationally.
the same, or was it like no movement? What was it just like?
Everything is the same.
same.
This is what I love too.
Wow.
It's a ward study. So they're under the conditions where they can track everything.
Oh, wow.
Now here's another part of the study I don't often talk about, is that they actually did biopsies. So they actually took
The fat cells.
cells to see what would happen with their fat cells under the different conditions. And what they came to the conclusion was that your fat cells actually need sleep too.
Oh.
Because when the fat cells were not, when they weren't adequately rested, their fat cells actually became more insulin resistant, which should become that should put up a huge red flag, because insulin resistance is one of the classic signs is carrying more belly fat, right? So the fat cells themselves, looking at them versus when you're well rested versus when you're sleep deprived, your fat cells themselves become insulin resistant. And it's just going to lead to downstream problems with your liver, lipogenesis, the creation of new fat, the list goes on and on. So that's just one thing.
That's
so number one. Number two, the cognitive performance. And I love this study. This was published in The Lancet. And they wanted to see what would happen when they took physicians and had them to complete a task and tracked all their numbers. Then they sleep deprived them for 24 hours, which is not abnormal in the field of medicine, and had them to complete the same task, which is a simulation of different surgical type of simulation.
Man.
They made 20% more mistakes doing the exact same thing, and it took them 14% longer to do the exact same thing. All right? So, and this is a big problem in our culture. Again, we mistake being busy for being effective, right? And so that's number two thing, the cognitive performance. Number three, and it parallels with cognitive performance, is the health of our brain. And so researchers at UC Berkeley did brain imaging scans, and we talked about this before, but they actually looked at the sleep-deprived brain, just again, 24 hours of sleep deprivation, and the part of the brain that's associated with executive function, right? So decision-making, distinguishing between right and wrong, social control. So the prefrontal cortex, the more human part of our brain, that part of the brain goes cold. The activity of that part of the brain just literally, as we're more and more tired, just shuts down.
With the lack of sleep.
With the lack of sleep. Coupled with more activity in the amygdala, which is very much more primitive, driven by emotion, very much concerned with survival of self. And so that part of the brain just lights up like a Christmas tree, or Las Vegas sign, you just came back from Vegas. So these changes happen in the brain very quickly. And that leads into number three, reduced cognitive performance. So being able to manage our emotions, being able to manage our decisions. And then we'll go to number four, is going to lean into this as well with the brain function, is, I talked a little bit about this earlier, during sleep is when your glymphatic system, which is the brain's waste management system,
Cleansing it all out.
It's 10 times more active when you're sleeping than when you're awake. So, and your brain is doing literally trillions of activities every second. And there's a lot of metabolic waste that takes place. And you have to have this cleansing system, this cleaning system, or you're going to have a buildup of things like amyloid beta plaque, for example, which that is strongly correlated with Alzheimer's disease. It's an inability of the brain to clean itself, and also insulin resistance in the brain we could talk about later. But we're wondering again, why are these issues going up? Why is brain inflammation going up? These are the things. Are we getting enough sleep for the processes that normally just naturally want to happen? They do it on their own. Are we getting that? The final thing.
So 4 is the cleansing.
Right.
Cleansing.
Cleaning. So this is associated with disease prevention of the brain, longevity of the brain. And number 5, this is tough. There's so many different things that this can benefit. But I would say for me and you as well, like we want to be able to perform. We want to be able to use our body and our mind to compete,
right.
to get out and to play, to have a good time. And one of the fun things that I talked about in my first book, Sleep Smarter, was research that was done on basketball players, collegiate basketball players at Stanford. And they found that simply by increasing the amount of sleep that they were getting, not training more, not doing anything else differently, this shaved a full second off of their sprint time just by increasing their sleep.
Wow.
They significantly improved their free throw shooting and their 3-point shooting just by getting more sleep. All right. And these are things that we just kind of on a periphery kind of know that, but at the same time, are we utilizing it? So some of the greatest athletes in the world right now, sleep is a part of their training. LeBron James, it's a part of his training. Usain Bolt, same thing. It's a part of his training. Mm-hmm. Now, Serena Williams, the list goes on and on and on. These things weren't taught to us when we were in high school.
No.
It was just like,
get up at 4 a.m. and lift.
Yeah, right. Just go run into somebody. You know what I mean? Make a play. Keep your head on a swivel. But today, it's really built into the system.
Yeah.
Also, the strength training programs are built into the system, which is beautiful because, again, when we were in high school, it was very, some stuff was starting to take place with folks being in the weight room, but it wasn't a big emphasis. Whereas now, if you look at different sports, like a good friend, it's so weird for me to say this right now. This is like the coolest thing. I actually got chills. Ozzie Smith, right? So having the opportunity.
St. Louis icon, man.
Icon. When I was a kid, my 2 idols were Ozzie Smith and Michael Jackson.
Wow, yeah.
And I tried to wear the Thriller jacket to school and I got drove. That was not a good look. But Ozzie Smith could be my role model and I wanted to play, I wanted to compete, play baseball. And so I actually met him at the gym. And so he was there. I think he was probably in his mid-60s maybe at the time. But he was there getting strong. And he was one of the first, if not the first high-level elite baseball players to really embrace strength training way back in the 80s.
Wow.
And the reason that he did it, funny enough, was he tore his rotator cuff and he didn't want to be out. This was back in the day where it's just like literally you do whatever it takes to get on the field, and he wanted to be there for his team. And so he just had to find out a way to strengthen everything around it because he didn't want to have surgery. He would have been out for a year at the time. And now, of course, surgeries have advanced tremendously since then. But so he found that he strengthened everything in his shoulder, but also he started throwing from a completely different arm angle and still won 13 consecutive gold gloves.
It's crazy.
It's crazy.
Backflipping at the same time.
Right. He's out there backflipping with the glove on.
It's cool.
Man, it's so powerful. But it's a big part of what our genes expect is to be strong in some different domain. And we talked about this before the show. That translates over into our lives as well. So that strength, if you can train your body and your mind, because your mind is in play too, life gets a little bit easier in many aspects. You feel more physically ready to handle whatever life throws at you. And so in the context that final one is being able to perform at a high level, to recover from the training that we do. All the magic happens when you're sleeping.
Absolutely.
When you're up in the gym and training, or you're out on the field competing, you're just tearing your body up. That's all catabolic stuff.
Yeah.
You get the anabolic reward when you go to sleep.
When I was interviewing Andrew Huberman, the neuroscientist out of Stanford, he was saying that even learning a new skill, it's like the neurons connect when you're sleeping. Like when I do Spanish class sometimes, I'm just like, I'm not getting this. There's moments where I'm like, gosh, this hurts my brain. It's so challenging. But then I come back the next day or 2 days later and I'm like, oh, I've connected the neurons, or it's like in your sleep, things are moving and processing for you to really connect those things you're learning, those new skills, those challenging things. So I think and if I wasn't sleeping, I probably wouldn't connect the dots on a new skill. So something to think about there as well. I'm curious about this. Have you seen a study around, or any research around how our belief about our identity, how we view ourselves in the world. Whether we think positively of ourselves, we have confidence, we believe in ourselves, or our lack thereof, we have a bad view of ourselves. Is there any research about how that affects the brain, our actual mindset of the brain and ourselves?
Absolutely.
Have you seen any of this?
The number one driving force of the human psyche is to stay congruent with the ideas that we carry about who we are. Every thought that we think, every action we take is really correlated with who we believe ourselves to be. And this is why change can be so uncomfortable. You know, when we start to think things that I don't think that way, or these are things that I don't do, our physiology, this stuff really gets hardwired into us. And so it creates discomfort because we're literally going to start creating new neural pathways and potentially start to break down old ones. And a mutual friend, Dr. Caroline Leaf, man, I love her so much. And she's really brought to the forefront. And I talked a little bit about this in Eat Smart in my new book, and how our thoughts really affect our biology, even how food affects us based on our beliefs about the food. And so one of the biggest things to really come from her work that unfortunately it wasn't embraced, even though she's been in the field for 40 years, she really knows her stuff and has affected so many different lives. But it takes time for kind of collegiate training to change, for the books to change. But one of the big takeaways is thinking, your thoughts create your brain.
Really?
The process of thinking itself is creating your brain. And we think that the brain is, in and of itself, just kind of offshooting our thoughts. Now, we can absolutely have thoughts stored in our brain, but thinking is so much bigger. Our mind is creating our brain.
So thinking is a part of the mind, is that right?
Also the brain as well.
It's both.
Yeah, it's kind of within the brain, then we start to create, as she shares, I don't know if she did this with you, but she brings up the little trees and all these things.
The branches. And
so we start to create these, with a thought, little thought trees start to bear fruits, but we can supersede it. Your mind is bigger than just your brain. We tend to think that because everything is kind of up here, but our mind is in our toe as well. And our mind is just
in our
so
gut.
much. Yeah, in our gut. It's expansive.
I just had Dr. Emran Mayer on.
Yeah.
And he was talking about the mind in the gut and how it's all connected to the brain as well. The gut brain and the brain, and it's fascinating.
It's so fascinating.
The mind is connected throughout your body as well.
Yeah. So, for example, even our heart, within the gut, the human brain itself is just an absolute universe of neurons. So it's like 84 billion neurons, right? I was thinking about human cells overall. So we have about 84 billion neurons in the brain. We have about 100 million in the gut. All right. So this is like nerve tissue. It's like a mass of neural tissue in the gut. But the heart also has neurons as well. So it's called, and anybody can go to Dr. Google and look this up. It's called the heart brain. All right. So your brain, your heart actually has this kind of ability to think, and there's this electromagnetic energy that it's expressing. And there's a field also, it's called a tube torus, that's been monitored, that's expanding beyond our body to be able to see this. And if folks want to check out the work from Heart Math Institute, it is phenomenal. I've been, probably for about 10 to 15 years connected with Heart Math Institute. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
So there's a field around the heart. Does that mean like quantum physics we're talking about, or is this something else?
So
what is this field? An energy field?
We'll keep it real simple first, which is if we think about the electrical energy that the heart is kicking off, like when you're in the hospital, right? And you see the monitor, boop, boop. It's not reading the smoke coming off your heart. It's reading the electrical energy that's coming off the heart, right? So you got EKGs and things of that nature. So we can read the electrical currency that the body is throwing off. Wow. Your body is just teeming with energy. And there's even a form of energy that we generate. It's called piezoelectricity, right? Just from moving, we're generating energy and electricity. So just from a very simplistic level, the heart is kicking off energy that we can't see. That's the thing about it, right? It's emanating from beyond us. Even our skin is emanating energy. We just see a certain spectrum of light as humans. We see a certain spectrum of energy.
How far does this energy go beyond the body?
So the tube torus is, from Heart Math Institute's data and being able to measure it and monitor it, it can be upwards of, at last checked, around 8 feet from your body. And so now this is getting into some freaky stuff, all right? And
give it to me.
I'm a very logical, analytical human, so seeing is believing for me. But then we get into, there's many things that are just, and also I'm very open-minded as well. And there's many things that we don't understand. But when we talk about people being in your space and you picking up people's energy and interacting, and that stuff is very real. You know, you can pick up people's vibes, you know, quote, bad vibes. So we don't want to downplay that, because other species of animals, they have that bigger connection. And we can attribute, like bees, for example, you know, in this quote, hive mind, but we throw that away when it comes to us. And so for me, for years, I've been seeking to find, how can I explain this to people to make sense? Because I'm a very solid thinker, you know, I'm a very logical person. And one of the things I came across was Princeton University researchers. They found that they just took two strangers and they put them together and they had them to just chat. And they found out within a matter of minutes, all they had to do was create some rapport and their brain waves started to sync up.
Come on.
Their brain waves started syncing up just by having rapport and talking to another person. We start syncing up. And this happens all the time.
What does that mean that we sync up? The brain is what?
So it's like, again, this is expanding beyond our kind of normal concept of what the brain is. Because it's not just the brain, it's also the mind. It's controlling the brain, right?
The mind is controlling the brain.
Yes.
The brain isn't controlling the mind.
We tend to think that it's the brain that's running the show.
It's not.
But
the mind. So what is the mind?
Put Dr. Caroline Leaf's episode in with this one. She could dive in deeper on what that is.
Right.
From a more clinical aspect. However, I'll tell you this. The mind it's something that we're still having a hard time to identify what it is and where it's located. That's the thing.
Where is it? Like here? Is it around here?
But
is it in outer
it's definitely
space?
not in your brain alone.
No.
Your mind is everything about you. Everything about you. The problem is that we tend to think that the brain is the master controller.
But it's not.
It's not. It's
What
absolutely
is?
not. The mind is.
Okay.
The mind. And we still are trying to dictate what the mind is. It's so big and it's so beautiful. It's expansive. So this is the adventure of all this stuff. It's like we get to learn, we get to discover, but as soon as we think that we got it figured out, that's when everything starts to go wrong. Your brain could tell your gut to increase the absorption of calories from the food or decrease the absorption of calories from food. And so we talked about this lait time about these.
So wait a minute, your brain can tell your gut when I'm eating all these calories, don't absorb these calories, just let them go out.